Thank you, Mary. I want to say thank you to the National Park Service and the sponsors of today for the opportunity to be on this program. And I might just say that I'm speaking a lot more broadly than my religious dissertation topic today. I want to just start off by drawing your attention to two sources on mid-century modernism in St. Louis. One is the book on your right by edited by Eric Mumford, Modern Architecture in St. Louis, and the other is an online thematic survey by Betsy Bradley of the Cultural Resources Office of the City of St. Louis, and I have found both of these resources extremely valuable in my own work. There's more mid-century modern architecture in St. Louis in a rich array of types than most people realize, and I suspect that this is the case in most cities across the country. We generally use the term mid-century to differentiate the buildings of the post-war World War II years from the output of the pre-war years. Mid-century is an interesting term. It links architecture in the US to the growth and change resulting from post-war power and prosperity, even as the geopolitics of the Cold War cast a haze of uncertainty over the period. Like everything else at mid-century, architecture was shaped by these conditions. Modernism went mainstream at mid-century, thanks to mass production and marketing of materials, systems, furniture, appliances, all the components of modern living. So here are some questions. What defines the new architecture of the period? Does it merit a standalone label, mid-century modern, to differentiate it within the broader frame of modernism? Moreover, does the period hold together as a coherent chapter in the history of architecture? The vitality and originality of architecture in the post-war years in St. Louis is due in no small measure to the vision and talent of architects who were based here, many of them associated with Washington University School of Architecture. There appears also to have existed a climate of experimentation among architects in St. Louis in the 1940s and 50s. One, moreover, that engaged a number of gifted architects from elsewhere, including Eric Mendelsohn, Buckminster Fuller, Minoru Yamasaki, and Eero Saarinen. With these premises and questions in mind, I offer an overview, a brief overview, of the region's modernist buildings, showing how modernist thinking was pervasive in the building culture in both public and private sectors. And since our symposium is organized around materials and preservation, I highlight buildings in which materials were key to new architectural solutions. I also trace a narrative of loss, because like other parts of the country, and as we've heard from our keynote speaker, and indeed the world, many landmarks of modernism in St. Louis are under threat of demolition or are already lost. St. Louis's modernist architectural narrative is one of continuity and innovation, especially with respect to the use of brick. Nowhere is the persistence of brick as visible as in the robust yet elegant and ordered, brutalism-inspired facade of St. Louis Community College at Forest Park, 1965, designed by the Chicago-based architect Harry Weiss and Associates. The brick construction in the region is an extrusion of its geology, literally a man-made formation on the surface that expresses the layers of clay beneath. Local abundance made clay products the material for high and low-cost architecture alike. Brick and terracotta were vital components of the 1891 Wainwright Building, which established St. Louis as a site where the challenges of modern tall building were triumphantly addressed. Designed by Adler and Sullivan, the Wainwright demonstrates mastery of brick and terracotta applied over a modern steel skeleton. Further north, the Neighbourhood Gardens apartment complex was completed in 1935 as a settlement home for white working class, typically immigrant families who worked in the downtown garment industry nearby. Designed by Herner, Baumann, Frazee, the patterning and craftsmanship recall the use of brick in modernist housing developments in Holland during the period. Here, the architect gave St. Louis's accomplished bricklayers artistic freedom, resulting in rich surface textures. And also in the mid-1930s, the Homer G. Phillips Hospital, a medical complex designed to serve black healthcare needs in a segregated St. Louis, arose in the Ville neighborhood to the north. Designed by city architect Albert Osberg, the complex was hailed for its sensitive accommodation to the surrounding residential architecture, achieved in part by the disposition of the brick in horizontal courses that helped to ground the structures. The complex exemplified how the beauty of materials could be leveraged to turn a monolithic institutional presence into an aesthetically pleasing community attribute. Frank Lloyd Wright designed two houses in St. Louis, both notable for their coherent brick elaboration, and we'll look at one of them. The plan of the 1951 Krause House is based on an equilateral parallelogram module that is repeated throughout the building in a variety of scales on the slab floor and in the Wright-designed furniture. The warmth of the Krause House arises from its two signature materials, Tidewater red cypress and Wyandotte brick, which Wright continued from the exterior to the interior. Wright's organic design principles were taken up by William Bernoulli, who had learned from Wright firsthand as a fellow at Taliesin. In St. Louis, Bernoulli worked in partnership with Ed Mutro, to be joined later by Hank Bauer. All told, the Bernoulli partnerships built an extensive inventory of houses using brick and wood that translated Wright's ideas into comfortable, livable environments, mostly for the well-to-do. Bernoulli's own home in Ladue, shown here, is an exquisite essay in residential modernism. B'nai Amoona Synagogue, built from 1945 to 50, was the first US commission for the German émigré Erich Mendelsohn. Mendelssohn's work in St. Louis was significant for the city's standing as a venue for architectural experimentation. B'nai Amoona was the first modern synagogue in North America. As such, it ushered in a period of reinvention of synagogue design across the country. B'nai Amoona is constructed of concrete block faced with buff Ohio brick, set in a stack bond pattern. The lightness of the color mediates the sense of weight, and the geometric ordering results in a certain quietness in the masonry that seeds the drama of the design to its signature feature, namely the sweeping roof that cantilevers out from the sanctuary wall. Mendelsohn enlivened his predominantly flat-roofed horizontal scheme, seen here in plan, with the wing-like form of a bisected parabola, a daring tectonic gesture writ large against the sky to dramatize modernity. The soaring curve that projects some 26 feet from the wall was formed with steel I-beams that taper from the base to the termination of the cantilever. In the secular sector, the May Company, a national St. Louis-based retailer headed by Morton May, introduced a new era of retailing with 3 new branches of its famous bar store. The Clayton Famous, which opened in 1948, seen in the middle image, was designed by Samuel Marks with his Chicago-based firm of Marks, Flint, and Schoen. The store and the Southtown Famous, designed by John P. Honer to resemble its Clayton sibling, repeated the signifying features of the May Company's ultra-modern Los Angeles store on Wilshire Boulevard's Miracle Mile, on the left here. including the flat roof, the streamlined corner on the building's leading edge, and the continuous band of display windows at the street level. Earlier, May had made explicit his commitment to modernism when in 1940 he commissioned Marx to design an international-style residence for him in Ladue, a landmark that was demolished in 2005. The third famous bar store was built as the anchor of Northland Shopping Centre, introducing one-stop suburban shopping, a concept that integrated a department store on a site with other retailers and amenities. Designed for the May Company in 1955, Northlands was composed of cubic volumes of varying heights, articulated by open walkways on a 50-acre site that accommodated the increasing demand for parking. Construction costs were reduced with the use of a welded steel frame, one of the first such applications in a multi-storey project in the area. In nearby Wellston, in 1948, a distinctive store based on international-style concepts was designed for J.C. Penney by the father and son team of William P. and Bernard McMahon. Faced in smooth white stucco, incised with a regular grid, relieved by rows of thin metal sash windows, the store sported an open roof deck reminiscent of Le Corbusier's Villa Savoie near Paris. The building has been unoccupied for some 4 decades. In the post-war years, as structural concrete began to enter the mainstream, reinforced concrete shell technology opened up seemingly unlimited possibilities for architects who exploited its plastic qualities to produce some of St. Louis's most remarkable buildings. Helmuth, Yamasaki, and Lineweber's Lambert International Airport terminal, which opened in 1956 and which Gio Obata has described for us this morning, featured a series of 3 intersecting parabolic vaults enclosing the passenger, check-in, and waiting areas. On the interior, a 48-foot-long metal partition screen crafted from brightly coloured geometric shapes by the Cranbrook trained sculptor Harry Bertoya underscored the modern vocabulary of the terminal design. An alternative gateway, one for bus travellers, arose in 1964 on Broadway in downtown St. Louis. Schwartz and Van Hofen's design for the Greyhound bus terminal also deployed thin shell concrete for a parabola-based roof that cantilevered over the passenger terminal in a dynamic, swooping gesture, evocative of the dynamics of travel. This model of mid-century design was demolished in 1992. However, a more positive outcome was achieved for the former Phillips 66 station in Midtown, known colloquially as the Flying Saucer or the Del Taco building. Built in 1967, this historic structure survived a demolition threat in 2011 and is now renovated with Starbucks and Chipotle as tenants, contributing amenities on the southern flank of St. Louis University. The glass and concrete building was the smallest, if most distinctive structure in a complex, seen here in this aerial shot, designed for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters by Richard Henry of Schwartz and Van Hofen. The tectonic strength and spanning capability of thin shell concrete enabled the architect to use a hyperbolic paraboloid for the roof, which was 6 inches thick over a span of 120 feet and was supported by angled concrete piers towards the center. That's in 1956, as design partner in the newly formed Helmuth, Obata and Cassabaum, Gio Obata started design on the priority church for the Catholic Order of Benedictines. This was the firm's first religious commission. The client believed in the potential of the new architecture to shape modern Catholic faith, and as we've heard from one of our participants, that potential he had glimpsed in the light-filled, airy, vaulted structure of Lambert Airport, and in which thin shell concrete played a starring role as a material. Guillaume Obata effectively reformulated the medieval arch in thin shell concrete as parabolic form, thereby embedding layers of reference for the Benedictines, whose normative building style was Gothic revival. Instead of glass, Obata used cowl wall for the windows, an insulated, reinforced fiberglass product that appears black on the exterior but admits a suffused light to the interior. And we've heard about the McDonald Planetarium. Bush Memorial Stadium, which opened in 1966 as the new home of the St. Louis baseball Cardinals and was demolished in 2005, was part of the logic of the modernized riverfront and formerly very much a piece with the Gateway Arch, from which it took its signature parabolic motif. Designed by Edward Dorrell Stone, the stadium's graceful coronet of parabolas at the roofline, realized in concrete, explicitly acknowledge Saarland's arch. In 1960, Washington University unveiled a modernist departure from the campus's collegiate Gothic style with Steinberg Hall, which was the first commission in the United States for the Japanese architect Fumihiko Maki, who was working at Washington University School of Architecture at the time. Steinberg Hall exemplified the potential of thin shell concrete with a distinctive roof that remains a definitive essay in folded plate structure. Physicians and related professionals were early proponents of modernist design, both through its efficiency and relative economy and because of what the new architecture could represent to a public emerging from the strictures of the Depression, namely a confident, optimistic, future-oriented approach to medicine. Nowhere is this more evident than in the orthodontic clinic that Harris Armstrong designed in 1935 for Dr. Leo Shanley in the future county business district of Clayton. A pristine white building on a prominent corner site, the Shanley building is recognized as the first foray into the international style in the area. The building is made from poured concrete covered with a skin of fine white stucco. Returning war veterans created a demand for new housing that was met by suburban expansion in all directions from St. Louis and made viable through increased car ownership. The ranch house was the dwelling type of choice for the middle-class family. In the St. Louis region, the developer Burton Denke realized early that money could be made using mass production with its economies of scale to address the challenge of affordability. While large houses for the well-heeled were literally spacious in terms of site, area, and volume, the sense or illusion of space in a structure that was physically much smaller than it seemed or felt became an indispensable feature of the modern middle-class house. The Washington University-trained husband and wife architects Ralph and Mary Jane Fournier, who became collaborators in the realization of Denke's vision, had a deft talent for creating spaciousness in their architecture. The prototypical house, designed for Ridgewood, 1952, one of Denke's 5 subdivisions in the area, featured a slab-on-grade foundation with post and beam construction and open interiors. Prefabricated wall panels manufactured locally by Denke's company were shipped within a 550-mile radius of St. Louis. St. Louis seemed progressive, at least to the editor of House and Home, who in 1953 observed that conservative St. Louis buyers were part of a national trend towards modernist housing and predicted that the Denke-Fournier models would be implemented across the country by them and by others following suit. A novel modular wall system was introduced by Ed Mutro, working in partnership with William Bernoulli for the interior and exterior of his 1950 house in Ladue. Demolished in 2005, the Mutro house featured walls of fire-resistant Cemesto board, which the Celtics Corporation had introduced in 1937 for heat and sound insulation. Asbestos cement was applied to one or both sides of the panels, which in Mutro's house were then painted and mounted in wood frames. A notable, less aesthetically mediated application of Celotex panels can be found in the residential architecture of Isidore Schank. Schank used structural insulation panels with exposed fir beams, which enhanced the solid look and feel of the house. Opening in 1960 and based on modular technology, the Climatron at the Missouri Botanical Garden was the first application of Buckminster Fuller's geodesic tome concept to a greenhouse. The form encapsulated the institution's scientific mission and was readily associated with technological progress. Murphy and Mackey were the architects. The dome, designed by Synergetics, constituted a grid of structural triangles over a sphere and was, according to Fuller, the most efficient way to enclose space using minimal material. The dome was fashioned from triangular plexiglass panels suspended from an aluminum frame and sealed by neoprene gaskets. This system pioneered the use of aluminum as a structural metal, a feat that earned Murphy and Mackey the 1961 R.S. Reynolds Memorial Prize for innovative use of aluminum. In the 1950s, as downtown St. Louis declined, redevelopment initiatives in the 1947 city plan, drawn up by the architect and planner Harlan Bartholomew, went into effect. Plaza Square, a complex that integrated 6 modern apartment blocks of limestone, brick and concrete with 2 historic churches on a 4-block site, tested the premise that a blighted downtown precinct could be reinvented with modern market-rate high-rise housing that would attract residents back to the urban core. For the project, the newly formed HOK teamed up with Harris Armstrong. The unique colour field of enamel painting on the east and west walls of the towers was specified by Alexander Girard, who had worked with Eero Saarinen on the General Motors Technical Center in Detroit and the Miller residence in Columbus, Indiana. You will, of course, recognize this as Pruitt-Igoe, which was demolished in the 1970s. From 1950 to 56, the city of St. Louis erected public housing on a hitherto unprecedented scale in the US, and Pruitt-Igoe was the largest such project in the region. It consisted of 33 flat-roofed concrete slab high-rises faced with brick, with walls punctuated by glazed galleries and metal sash windows. The architect Minoru Yamasaki of Helmut Yamasaki and Lineweber, who would design Lambert Airport and later the World Trade Center in New York City, drew his modernist urban planning inspiration from Le Corbusier, who advocated slum clearance and a tabula rasa. When the implosion started in 1972, Pruitt-Igoe came to associate St. Louis with a failed public housing experiment and, moreover, with the demise of European-style modernism itself. From the late 1930s onward, innovative and extensive use of glass marked many a new building as modern, and I'll look at just one application of this. In 1947, Harris Armstrong designed a headquarters and display center for the American Stove Company, later Magic Chef, a building that was praised for its strategic use of daylighting through bands of windows running the length of the north and south facades. Armstrong embedded Magic Chef's marketing strategy into a modern state-of-the-art building with glass expanses that allowed the building to glow at night in a perpetual advertising cycle. The retail experience unfolded in a facility replete with vital forms, including an artful play of biomorphic shapes on the ceiling of the entry lobby by the sculptor Isamu Noguchi, which evolved a lunar landscape. Stained glass is a feature of the Lewis and Clark Branch Library in North County, designed by Frederick Dunn and Nolan Stinson. Dunn and Robert Harmon of the Emil Fry studio produced a dazzling display of glass on the north facade that integrated figurative representations of the legendary explorers with fields of saturated primary colours and textured panes of abstraction. This modernist landmark is under a demolition order as we speak. Part of the glass will be displayed in the new building. In conclusion, I turn to the Gateway Arch, which is the centrepiece of the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial here on the Mississippi Riverfront, and the indispensable symbol by which people everywhere identify St. Louis. Eero Saarinen's pitch-perfect stainless steel expression of the times rises from a complementary landscape of biomorphic shaped water features set in green space and designed with the landscape architect Van Kiley. Saarinen, in search of a form whose simplicity would render it simultaneously timeless and legible in the moment, started out with a parabolic concept in mind. A parabola is an open form with a central axis and arms diverging symmetrically on both sides from the vertex. Saarinen was familiar with parabolic form, and I won't elaborate on this, but I could later. And the arch ended up being a catenary, not a parabola. So as this compendium shows, the incidence of parabolic form in the post-war years in St. Louis is striking. The architects of these buildings embraced formal innovation using materials such as thin shell concrete and structural steel, even as brick was revitalised as a building material of choice. The result has been a trove of unique structures, which attests to a spirit of inventiveness in the period. Because many of our historic mid-century modern structures are sadly gone, the loss of any one of those remaining should give us pause. Thank you.